right, same scenario now. We were looking at just the mechanical efficiency of having your hands in a high position or having your hands in a low position. If your hands are lower, it's easier to have your thumb up and your fingers down, just the way your arms are designed. And if your hands are high and the weapon's high, it's easier to do it with your thumb pointing at you, whether you're grabbing the wrist or whether you're grabbing the weapon itself. So now we come to the scenario where I wanted my hands here so I could do the one we just did, but the guy walks up and puts a gun to me. Jeez. And of course I'm caught off guard. Oh man, my hands have gone up too high. Now with good tactics, good training, good presence of mind, maybe I can work my hands back down here and start this, but many times I'm going to have to deal with this situation now. It's an awkward motion to come all the way down. It's probably easier if I work from here to drop the weapon down. Okay, so we can drop it down like we did for the looking down the barrel and go to the same one, although with the arm in this position, it's not as likely I'm going to get that armpit lock, but I may get my strip out here, which is nice, but if there's any resistance, we know what to do. We go to the hammer lock. That's a good way to do that one. Okay, so we can start seeing the interchangeability concept here. I can also grab the wrist and point it straight down if I'm worried about the discharge, depending on what kind of surface you're on. Again, there's a lot of tactical considerations that with enough time, enough training, hopefully you have presence of mind to think about. If you're on a cement floor, for example, maybe you don't want the discharge to happen because there's a much greater chance of a ricochet, which may or may not be fatal, but chunks of cement coming up, hitting you in the eyes could throw you off. If you're in an apartment building and you know that where I live, everything's drywall and 2x4s. If that gun goes off this way, boom, it can go through the floor and hit somebody. Same if we're dealing with these concepts. Maybe it's maybe on the bottom floor. So the reason why there's a lot of variations also to give you tactical choices. If there's someone on the left of you, right, you want to avoid this one. If there's someone on the right of you, you're not going to do it this way. So again, these start becoming interchangeable. Now, these ones are the same. If I do it this way, I can disarm this the same way as I did before when we looked at the counter deployment situation. I can peel this out, or if his elbow comes up high enough, I'm in that vertical wrist lock position. Okay? So we want to, in fact, try to avoid having different disarms for every different situation, because we end up with a whole lot of material. So again, the jiu-jitsu approach is if you already know how to do certain locks and holds and throws when you're holding a person's arm, if the gun is in the same position, you've got the same locks. It's a good approach. So from here again, I have a couple of choices. If it's jammed into me here tight, and this is a good one when it's tight because it's harder to come here and work on moving my hand inward. It doesn't seem like a big motion, but when we're talking about milliseconds, it can be the difference between clearing that line of fire and not. So if he's really jamming it in, this is the classic one here, and it's not bad. Now if my hands are up, I'm going to have to knock it down and do this one. And again, I could probably do a version of that or the wrist lock. Okay. The old school approach was to use the wrist lock once again. They really liked this wrist lock. You see it in the counter deployment from here. You can do it from threat to the head, and you can do it from threat to the body if your hand's above. So, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is not a big fan of wrist locks, but if you put in the time and you are proficient at them, then that's a very interchangeable sequence that you can do. Now, there are some really high-level guys, both in combat sambo and classical martial arts, that start adding a different level of additions. You can make your wrist lock and block the hammer. So now this takes even more practice. You're going to need to drop it and stop the hammer at the same time. But again, basically you've got the same wrist lock. Remember, keep it away from you. If there's a discharge, it's in him. If he's very, very powerful, he pushes his arm straight. This flows again into the same classic sequence that is a very good sequence for all forms of standing self-defense, especially against weapons, whether you're dealing with a knife, firearm, or empty-handed. Okay? So again, this situation is because my arms are up. Oh man. Okay, I need to drop that down. Vertical wrist lock. Okay. If there's space between us and my hands are high, oh man, I can do the same one this way. Strip it right out. Possibility of the elbow lock, but more likely I'm going to go to this vicious hammer lock that's going to break his finger off and end up behind him like that. Okay, so that's a good choice from the front.